Today, I wanted to give you 10 things you need to know about Grand Teton before you go in 10 minutes. My name is Cheryl. I'm a co-founder of We're in the Rockies, and my husband Matt is behind the camera. What is Grand Teton? Grand Teton is most famous for its really jagged mountain peaks. They are so spiky, they're so incredible. They remind me of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, where the abominable snowman's on there. That's exactly what the Tetons look like. I can't believe how spiky they are. The other thing special about Grand Teton are the glacial lakes that are sitting right in front of it, and then there's the prairie in front of those lakes. And then this is just a real mecca for wildlife, bears, bison, moose, and antelope. I love it. So there's a lot of beautiful things in Grand Teton National Park. Now, where is Grand Teton National Park? Most people always associate Grand Teton with Yellowstone National Park. And so it does sit technically an hour below Yellowstone National Park, although I believe that you have to say it's 2 hours below Yellowstone National Park, because the heart of Yellowstone, where the Grand Loop is actually an hour into the park. Then you leave the park and then you drive an hour to get to Grand Teton. But it's in western Wyoming is basically where Grand Teton is. Grand Teton is actually a longer, thinner park. It only takes about an hour to get from one end of Grand Teton to the other end. And then if you want to go into the city of Jackson, which is very famous, that's another half hour from the south end of Grand Teton National Park. And that's the next thing I want to talk to you about, is what exactly is Jackson Hole. So there's some really interesting terminology that gets thrown out around the Teton area. So Grand Teton National Park is the national park where the mountain range is. Jackson Hole is actually the term they use for this whole area. Hole is kind of just another word for like valley or area. The city of Jackson is what most people think about with the antler arches and the cowboy bar and just the real touristy shopping Old Town district. That's the city of Jackson. And then there's also another little area called Teton Village, which is outside of the park, but still great views of the Tetons. Next up is what to do. Wow, there is a great big list of things that you can do in this area. We always say that Yellowstone is where you sightsee and Teton is where you come to play. This park is very interactive. There's a lot of recreational activities, starting with my very favorite, which is river rafting. You can go on both scenic rides and on whitewater rides. And my very favorite is to go into the town of Jackson, book a whitewater charter, because not only are you going to still get to see some great scenery, but there are some awesome rapids like Lunch Counter and Big Kahuna. That's one of my favorite childhood memories, is rafting down the Snake River. Next up is hiking. Hiking in Grand Teton is not as intimidating as you would think, because when you look at those Tetons, you think, oh my gosh, I've got to be a mountaineer to get up these mountains. But the truth of it is that there's actually some very easy hikes that most people do go on, and they're right through the valley heading to the mountain lakes, where you can get a really good close-up view of those Teton peaks. So you are hiking on level ground. It's mostly packed dirt, boardwalks. I love Taggart Lake, I love Phelps Lake, and of course the very beautiful Jenny Lake, which is one of the other things to do here. In fact, Jenny Lake is the #1 thing to do in Grand Teton, and it's just because it's such a beautiful lake. But something special about that is you can get on a shuttle, like a boat shuttle, go across Jenny Lake, and then there's Inspiration Point and Hidden Falls. You can totally cheat 2 miles off of your hiking each way if you just take that 12-minute shuttle across the lake. Other things to do is biking. It's a very bike accessible park. You can rent bikes, and the bike trail goes clear from Jackson all the way through Teton. Very, very popular thing to do. And then the other great thing about the Grand Teton National Park in Jackson is there is a nightlife around here. You can go to the Hoot NY, and if you want to know what that is, you ought to check out our hour-long trip planner on all the things that there are to do at Grand Teton, and lodging and food and all of that stuff. But the Hoot NY is pretty darn fun. Jackson Hole has the cowboy bar. There is a wonderful Jackson Playhouse. There's the Barty 5, where you can go on a wagon ride and look at the stars, because it's at nighttime, and then they play the fiddle and they serve you dinner. There's really just no shortage of things to do here in Grand Teton National Park. Now, as far as where to stay, that's a tricky question. And I used to believe when I was younger that the only places there are to stay in Grand Teton are in the city of Jackson or camping, but I was completely wrong. My husband Matt and I have spent the last 2 days here in Grand Teton actually researching lodging, and I am really pleased to say that you have more options than just those 2 things, because the truth is not everybody is a camper, and then the prices in Jackson are outrageous. And in the middle of summer, it can be not only expensive, but super crowded. And so not everyone wants to stay in those things. And so some alternatives to staying in those two places are there are lodges within the park. So those are great because you kind of cap at how much those prices can be. Then you've got an hour away, you've got the cities of Victor and Driggs. If you want more of like a ranch experience, you can go to Moran. There is a lot to get into on lodging, and I don't want to bore you with that detail, but you can check out our Grand Teton playlist, and there is a video that we have in there all about lodging options in Grand Teton. Another question we often get asked is how many days to visit Grand Teton? And my pretty solid answer on that is a minimum of 2 days. 2 days will allow you to do some pretty cool stuff, catch a few hikes, do some of the cool viewpoints, take some pictures, drive around the park, and maybe fit in an activity or two. But if you really want to experience the area, I would say maybe 3 to 4 days. There is just so much to do here, and it really does kind of vary on what your interests are, but you are not going to run out of things to do in Grand Teton National Park. Another question we often get asked is, when should you visit Grand Teton National Park? And my answer is right now. I'm shooting this video at the very end of September, and you can see behind me, oh my gosh, it does not get prettier. We've got the aspens turning yellow and red. The park is pretty cleared out. We have had perfect weather. It's like in the 60s. The crowds are kind of out of the park. It has been so ideal. Now, I can tell you sometimes I don't think you should visit Grand Teton, and that would be, you know, in the winter, Jackson is a ski town, so that's a very different experience. But times that I think would be pretty terrible to visit would be the shoulder seasons, like maybe April-ish. May could be a real gamble. I think it could be really rewarding if you got here in May. Hopefully the weather would be good. But we are high elevation, and snow still does happen at that time. And so that can kind of cause a wrench in your plans. Another time that is a little iffy is October. Like right now, it's September 29th. It's very nice here, but things are starting to close down for the season, including rafting, which is one of my favorite things to do. Also, you never know when winter is going to come. It's not uncommon for the winter to begin the very beginning of October. And so whenever I hear about people saying they're planning a trip in October, I always am kind of crossing my fingers for them, hoping that the weather cooperates. One other question we get is, does Grand Teton need a reservation? A lot of our national parks have switched over to timed entry tickets and things like that. Fortunately, for right now, Grand Teton does not have any sort of system like that. You don't need a reservation to get into the park. A few years ago, a lot of the campgrounds here were first come, first served, and it was a disaster. You were having to get here at 5 a.m. in the morning to just get a campsite, but now those campsites are on a reservation system. You can book them 6 months in advance, and it's really made the trip planning a lot less stressful. And so I've really been grateful for that. But yeah, no reservations are required. But with that being said, Grand Teton gets crowded. It gets the same amount of visitors as Yellowstone, but Yellowstone, the size of Delaware and Rhode Island put together, Grand Teton, like I said, you can drive from one end to the other in 1 hour. And so all those people are having to pack into that small area. The parking lots fill up. And a lot of times Grand Teton is not super, the rangers are not super accommodating letting people park on the roads, probably for preservation reasons, but it kind of stinks when you come in and you can't find a parking spot to get to the hike you want to go to. So yeah, crowds are definitely an issue within Grand Teton National Park. And then going back to Yellowstone, many visitors often ask, well, can I just do a day trip from Yellowstone down into Grand Teton? And my answer is yes, you can, but should you? No. Yellowstone and Grand Teton, they are both trips all on their own. They are very different parks. Yellowstone is the geysers and the wildlife and the canyons and the waterfalls. And Grand Teton is the adventure, the stunning mountain peaks. It's just the whole towns, they have, not towns, but the parks have a completely different feel from one another. And when we travel to these places, Matt and I, we live in the West. We live 4 hours away from both of these parks. And usually when we visit these parks, we'll either visit them on separate trips, or if we're doing it on one trip, like I'm guessing maybe you are, we will switch locations and we will spend, we think it's a better idea to spend like 4 days in Yellowstone and 2 or 3 days in Grand Teton than to spend a whole week in Yellowstone, because like Yellowstone's B-list attractions are not as cool as Teton's A-list attractions. And if you want to know more, check out our trip planner video. It has all the information you need to get started. Thank you so much for letting me talk about one of my favorite parks with you. And until next time, go West, young traveler.